Hi, Dave Jones here. Just wanted to share with you guys some of the presentation I gave in Papendal a couple of weeks ago to the S&C coaches there, to some of our group. Did it on the management of Patella and Quads Tendinopathy, but thought it was also good relevant information to share with you guys. To get some extra thoughts, get some insights, also a little update on what's happening maybe for some of the coaches from the S&C side. So try a little recording out and let us know what you think. What we're going to talk about is some of the properties of tendons and some of the pathophysiology, so how they behave and how they behave differently when they're diseased. Some of the risk factors for getting the injury. We'll look at some of the jump loads that we've looked at in beach volleyball in terms of how many jumps are happening in a day, in a match, in a week, in a tournament, that sort of stuff. Outline some of our rehab processes. Look at how we're managing the guys in season when perhaps rehab isn't an option. Look at our overall prevention strategy. Talk about some of the things we've learned along the way and where we want to take it for the future. So some of the basic properties of tendons. Really simply, I won't spend too long on this. Tendons are a spring, elastic store and energy release. So with loading, we get increased stiffness. So that's a training effect. So that's why plyometrics are good for distance runners, because it improves the stiffness of that musculotendinous structure, and they can store and release energy more easily, so there's less muscular effort. Equally for our jumping athletes, we improve the stiffness of the musculotendinous unit, which means they can store more elastic energy and get greater release. We get better jump scores and more easy jump scores, taking less muscular effort. So that's why some people will jump easy, some will jump. Looks like it's a big effort. But anyway, the key point is loading will make the tendon stiffer, whereas unloading will decrease that stiffness. And a big thing, I've highlighted one study here, was looking at the loading and recovery cycle, and it was showing that the upregulation and the downregulation of the cells, as you train, you adapt. The peak remodeling was 3 days later in some of these studies. So the key point there is tendons are slow to adapt, which can make them, the implication of that is it can make them tricky to deal with. So often you see that clinical presentation of the athlete warms up, the knee starts feeling good, the coach asks how they're feeling, I feel great, no problem. It's not until the next day or 2 days later, in some cases, when that peak remodeling is occurring and they're getting that delayed pain response the day after. So that can make them a tricky injury to manage. And the other basic property is because they're a spring, they're designed for tension and not compression. So that has, again, important implications on the rehab and exercise selection with that. So there's some of the basic properties. If we look at some of the pathophysiology principles, this stuff I've taken from Jill Cook, who's a physio researcher in Australia, who's a world leader on the tendon stuff. I sat with her with an athlete. We had an athlete with tendon issues in tennis previously, and she had a really nice way of explaining it. So some of her catchphrases or sayings were, once a tendon, always a tendon. So I'll explain that on the next slide when I go through the continuum, their model of how they look at tendons. But basically, once you have some of these issues, there's always going to be some component there that we have to be conscious of and manage a bit. Second principle is tendons hate change. Tendons like a constant load. So they don't like a sudden increase in load, so you get those big load spikes. And equally, they don't like a big decrease in load, usually because that's followed by an increase, right? So they like to keep a consistent load on. That's something we've made some gains with. That's why in our off-season program, athletes are doing some certain number of jumps 3 times a week in order to maintain some load on the tendon. and avoid some of those big fluctuations in load. And later on we'll look at some of our strategies for how we look at load and how we look at measuring that in order to keep it the load constant. So yeah, so that feeds right into the third point. Always maintain load on the tendon. Yeah, so especially those off-season periods or deload weeks, there's some of the periods in the calendar where we can run into trouble. And yeah, getting to know the athlete and how they respond and tracking their responses, it will help you to provide the right load for the right time. And that's sort of the art side of the equation. And with this dosing of load, the whole idea is to improve the capacity. So that first slide, loading equals increased stiffness. If we get that loading right, we can improve the capacity of the tendon. Okay, so that's one of the goals of the rehab. Looking at this tendinopathy continuum, this point's an old one, old news in the literature now. Initially it was patella tendinitis, so the itis meaning it was an inflammatory thing. Now they know it's not really an inflammatory process that's going on, it's more of a degenerative process in some cases, so that's why the name's changed to tendinopathy. But yeah, walking through this diagram, it's looking at some of the different phases of a tendon. So you have a normal tendon here. We have insufficient recovery time and high training loads beyond what the tendon can handle, and it can progress to this reactive tendinopathy, which is the first stage. If we keep sliding down this side, you get tendon disrepair and down to degenerative tendon, which is, you know, when you ultrasound the tendon, there's some black spots there, there's damaged tissue, it's really struggling. Conversely, in a reactive tendon or a tendon disrepair, you can shift a little bit and get the loading right and get back into a normal tendon state, in which you can then train with the right amount of load instead of the wrong amount of load here, get the loads right, get that adaptation and strengthening cycle happening. Equally a good argument for getting the training right. If you don't get the right loads on and you get a relatively unloaded tendon, and then you do get those increases in loads, you can easily shoot down to here. And the other thing that's interesting with this is you can have a combination of these states. So you could have someone with a degenerative tendon. They've come all the way down this side. They've got tendon damage, but then in their non-damaged tendon, you can also get reactive on degenerative, if that makes sense. So you can get a flare-up of the good tendon, which you can modify the loads and get that back under control, but you might still have some underlying degeneration. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to highlight that because it's important for some of the rehab strategies and knowing that we need to treat different presentations a bit differently. You can't lump them all in the same basket there. So yeah, so what are some of the risk factors for getting a patella tendinopathy? We'll break it into the extrinsic and the intrinsic factors. Some of the extrinsic things, a change in surface. So we know tendons are spring, landing on a soft surface. There's a greater time to dissipate the forces, so there's less tendon loading. So that's why, jumping on the sand tends to have, for the same given load, jumping on the sand will have less trouble than jumping on the hard surface. Also, those transitions are really relevant for, say, our talent team athletes who are playing a bit of indoor club stuff and on the sand. The hard to soft transition tends, so from indoor to beach, tends to be easier than, say, beach to indoor. And we also notice that transition in terms of the beach volleyball guys playing on different sorts of sand, and when we do come to a venue that has harder, firmer sand, we tend to get those problems. So we know the guys are pretty finely tuned, and we'll talk about some of the strategies we have in place to do that a bit later on. So change in surface is a risk factor, change in load. So one big monster session can be enough to have that load spike and cause some problems. Consistent high load over a few days. So that's one where it probably resonates with some of us, a training camp. So the idea is we prep the guys as best we can to go to training camp to get through, and I think we're getting better at managing our loads in the training camp scenario and not yeah, not tipping them over the edge too much now. Returning to training is a common one. So if they've missed some consistency in their pre-season work and then throwing them back in, that load spike. And then also high loads when fatigued or stiff. So if they've got a lot of muscle pain and we're not modifying the training, or if they're totally shattered. So yeah, so those examples of how the change in load, sudden change in load, can influence a flare-up. Some of the intrinsic risk factors: a big vertical jump. So these guys are producing greater forces, so they have to dissipate greater forces, so they often have more patella tendon problems. This was found by Ina Janssen, a colleague at Papendal, some of her PhD work there. Yeah, so that's not a modifiable strategy. We're not likely to suggest don't jump as high because you won't get sore knees. But yeah, that's what we found is some of the guys with the bigger jumps are more at risk. Reduced quad strength and VMO atrophy. One study saying, if you're not as strong through the quads, they're at increased risk. Ina actually found the other way. The guys with stronger quads had increased risk. I think that relates to her jump finding here. The guys with strong quads jumped higher, so then therefore greater risk. So a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't. Poor kinetic chain function, not absorbing the forces or summating your force as well. Some stuff looking at flexibility. So tight quads means perhaps there's more stretch through the tendon component. Tight calves, hamstrings, ankle dorsiflexion range. There's a lot of stuff on. So yeah, so if you have a stiff ankle, and it's going to influence your landing strategy, and perhaps meaning you're going to bear more of the forces through the knee. Muscle fatigue is a risk factor. So if you've really got really poor condition and your muscles fatigue really easy and your mechanics fall apart, then you're more likely to bear loads through your tendons. The way I think about that one is I tried to run this half marathon in Miami last year, and I could probably hold it together for half, 3/4 of the way, and then the last bit, muscle fatigue kicked in, and then you get sloppy mechanics and you feel more in the joints. So on a basic level, that's how that works. Landing mechanics is a risk factor. So guys with those really stiff landings, this can tie into some of these things. So if you've got poor ankle dorsiflexion and you can't, which influences your landing mechanics and how you dissipate forces in your kinetic chain. So they're all sort of linked a little bit. It can also contribute or be a risk factor. And some of these studies are really good. I've looked at some of the different landing strategies and different groups in knee pain groups and non-knee pain groups. So good studies to have a look at there. And some of the other things, being overweight, being old, having poor collagen types. These are some of the things that are less in our control. And these two things aren't a big issue with us. We don't have really old or really overweight athletes at the moment. This is just a little video of muscle fatigue. So this is one of our guys, Robert, and went through a long rehab process. And this is not a joke. He was actually, his quad strength was actually like this. Excuse my cheesy laugh on the video. So that's just a demonstration of muscle fatigue being a risk factor there. Rob was in poor shape with his quads. So there's some of the risk factors associated with the thing. What we'll look at now is the demands of beach volleyball. So you guys know all this. We're playing up to 15 events in the season, a combination of all these Europeans, Worlds, Opens, Grand Slams, etc. The match format, best of 3 set matches to 21, third set to 15. Looking at some of the literature, it's a bit of common sense. It depends how close the match is and how long it goes. But in a 2-set match, about 80 points, 90 to 100 points in a 3-set match. If you're going to stand on the podium with the gold medal around your neck, you need in a regular tournament you need 8 matches. If you come through qualies, you could even have more matches than that. which is a situation we've had with some of our teams. And you're also having multiple matches in a day. So this is just to get your head around some of the loads that are involved in the match play. In terms of the number of jumps that can happen in these matches, obviously 2 guys on the court, there's going to be some considerable amount of jumping involved. We've taken some numbers. What we found is it's highly variable, as you could imagine. It depends, how many points are played, so how close the match is, whether you're jump serving or standing and serving, whether you're a blocker or a defender, whether the team's serving you or not serving you, whether you have long rallies or short rallies. So it is highly variable. We have found some general takeaways that for a blocker, there could be up to this 120 jumps in a match. And if you extrapolate that out to 8 matches in a tournament, we could get to 1,000 jumps in a week. Looking at some of the literature on landing stuff in the beach volleyball, this study filmed some matches and counted all the jumps and landings, and then looked at what percentage were 1 leg, 2 legs, in balance, out of balance. So, and again, that's obviously variable, but the general trend was 1/3 of the landings are on 1 leg and out of balance. So, as you can imagine, more load to dissipate on the landing when you're landing on 1 leg in these uncontrolled situations. Multiple times the body weight on landing. So, painting the picture of this, a high volume of jumps. A large percentage of these are out of balance, and you have to absorb many times your body weight over and over and over. So, forming the argument for being strong and robust in order to tolerate these sorts of stresses. So this is just a little graph looking at, this is total jumps in a match, including the warm-up. These were 2 of our athletes, just to give an example. And it was the blue guy was the blocker, the red was the defender, and they're getting in the, again you see the variability depending on how long the match goes, who they serve, blah blah blah. But the blocker getting to 120 in a match, defender maybe 105, looked like they served this guy a bit more in that match. So that just gives you an idea of what to prepare for. That's what a match is. Here's where we combine that same data into per day. So this was by match, and then by day, because there were some matches, 2 matches on 1 day, and then you can see for a blocker up to 230 in a day, 160 on this biggest day for the defender. Okay, it could potentially be more if you get 2 of your hardest matches on the 1 day. So that's getting your head around some of that. Here we're looking at a blocker and a defender, so the blocker in red, defender in green. These are the jumps over a season, number of jumps per week over a season. This is all pre-season phase up until around week 15, and then there's tournaments with weeks in between, a little bit of missing data through this period. But what I wanted to show was we did actually reach these levels. So in theory you say, okay, 120 jumps in a match, 8 matches, you can get there. Well, sure enough, we got there, 1,000 jumps 1 week for one of our blockers. And defender, a typical tournament week where you're going till the end, you got 750 jumps in there. So there can be much less if you only played 2 matches and you're done. It depends, what sort of quality of team you are and how many matches you're getting in a week. So again, it's highly variable. But I think this point is important, that you should plan for success, right? The idea is you want to prepare for being able to play each match and not being knocked out in the first 2 rounds. You want to plan for playing 8 matches in a week. You want to plan for playing many weeks in a row because, I think you want to prepare for the worst case scenario, and that's an important thing in sport. The demands of training, I think, should go above and beyond the demands of a match in order to prepare you. So the match, you're prepared and can tolerate whatever happens in a match. So there's some of the jump stuff, some interesting numbers. So we know the risk factors. We know there's some high demands on the tendon in volleyball. Now we're going to look at some of the rehab stuff. What we know, some of the key management principles with the tendons, the rehab process is king. There are, of course, medical avenues to explore, platelet-rich plasma injections and all this stuff, and that's not my real area of knowledge or expertise. But what I understand from speaking to some of the leading tendon guys is rehab is what forms the large proportion, and then that's been our experience here as well. It's not about the little extras, it's about getting the rehab right and the loading right. So what we do in the rehab, we look at the tendon where it sits on the continuum. We look at all the risk factors and the people factors, the personal factors. Look at what we can change and try change it. So yeah, running through that list of, is their kinetic chain function right? Is their landing mechanics right? Do they have stiff dorsiflexion? Can we address these things? And can we change them? And likewise on the loading side, get the loading right. This one, monitor response to load. We use the single leg decline squat to monitor player's response. So I'll skip ahead to that slide. This is a test we do to monitor the athlete's response to the load on the previous day. So what we have is a decline board here. This is set up to intentionally stress a greater knee angle. Okay, so you're trying to provoke a bit of knee pain. The athlete will get on and do a couple of single leg squats. They're scoring it just on a pain scale of 1 to 10. And what you're looking at, you're also looking at how deep they go, how easily. So you're looking at the quality of the movement, how deep they go, where the onset of pain is, all those sorts of things. But basically you're looking at, the pain score, and then using that and then relating that to the previous day's load. So they did 200 jumps yesterday and their knee score is now 3 out of 10. And then the next day they're a 2 out of 10, that sort of thing. So what you're really looking for is the doing this test consistently, and then looking for the change in score as the big thing. So if they've got 2 out of 10 pain, maybe that's okay if it's staying consistent at 2 out of 10. If it's jumping up to 4s or 5s, then that's flagging that they're not tolerating that load and we need to make a change. So that's what we've done with that. Initially we were getting the players to monitor that, but we found it was a bit loose in how they could perform it each day. So now I'm taking their scores in the gym, and the physio staff are also keeping a pretty close eye on how they're going with it. The other thing here with the monitoring the response to load, progressive overload is basically the biggest, the main principle that we're following in the rehab. And the example I give to the athletes is it's like the frog in the pot of boiling water. If you take a frog and throw it into some hot water, it'll jump out. But if you start the frog in cold water and gradually turn the heat up, it'll get up to boiling without him realizing it. So I've since been told that that's actually not true. That's a mythbuster myth or something. But yeah, that's the idea. You just want to gradually sneak the load up slowly, without the athlete realizing it, without the tendon realizing that it's getting more load through. So, this is the single leg decline squat, and then looking at there's no real clear pattern here, but this is looking at some of the things we're trying to find. This is the daily load in the blue, and then the knee pain scores on the single leg decline squat on the other scale. And this is looking at the number of jumps in blue and the pain response. Again, there wasn't a clear pattern here in this example. I just put it up to show that these are some of the variables that we're looking at, and that relationship that we're trying to see and adjust daily. So the rehab, we followed a fairly typical rehab process. The initial phase, we're using a lot of isometric work in mid-range. So this is relating to that point that tendons don't like compression. So we're finding a a mid-range position that's not causing a lot of compression, not causing a lot of additional pain. So reducing those compressive loads and not using the stretch shorten cycle. So the stretch shorten cycle is that stretch and release of energy in all these ballistic movements. So yeah, by doing isometric, we're taking the stretch shorten cycle and the speed out of all the movements. No energy release and storage. So just isometric holds in mid-range, and that the initial goal of that phase is to get the pain down, get it down to a decent level, and then once the pain's under control, we're looking to improve strength. We've used this heavy slow resistance training program, and again, we're using non-compressive positions. So that means, yeah, not full deep squats, not where you're getting a lot of increased loading of the tendons with those deeper knee angles. And again, the slow aspect means you're limiting the influence of this stretch shorten cycle. You're not putting load through the tendons, you're putting load through the muscles. And this process is quite a number of weeks. I can show you our protocol in a bit more detail up. And then typically we would try transfer from some of this into some more functional work. So examples in here we're doing squats, leg presses and leg extensions, all just in non-compressive positions, and then we might try to get into some more lunging, single leg squats, some more functional tasks, I guess you could call them. Interestingly, if you follow the classic rehab process, then you're going to try increase the speed. What we've tended to do is keep the exercises pretty consistent, so still things like squats, but just increase the tempo a little bit. And what we usually have running parallel to this is its introduction of stuff on the court where they are getting little elements of stretch shorten cycle work and some power work. Building in a graduated jump program is really important. So introducing these low-grade plyos to start, jumping onto boxes to start, really building up those loads, and then getting back into the actual jumping in relation to the skill. So this phase is all about our jump progressions and how we progress through there. So from onto the box to off the box to more speed, building in run-ups, and then into the sand and all those progressions there. So, and then this last phase, maintenance. Yeah, the real thing that we do is keep the strength work in. They tend to get all the sport-specific stuff and the plyometric work on the court, and we keep the strength work really constant in the gym with this heavy, slow resistance stuff. So that's a rough overview, a quick overview of our rehab process. This is some exercise examples that we might use in the first couple of stages, either the heavy slow resistance or the reducing pain phase. This is a reverse squat. Again, you can see where you might go as low as 90 here. I haven't gone very low, but we're in a non-compressive position. Okay, pain-free, and we're doing that isometric exercise in nature. Other exercise here is a reverse sled drag. I'll show a picture here. So Alex is dragging backwards here. So you're in those non-compressive positions, and you've got lots of time under tension, so it's slow. There's not a lot of energy release and storage. So these are some of the exercise choices that are fitting our rehab model there. So that's if we have someone for a significant period in the off season to try and get them better. In season, it's a tough challenge where what's happening there is the tendon struggling to meet the demands upon it. So it's hard to achieve the two things of performing on the field and also getting some rehab done. So the first point is do we need to maybe make smart choices and choose and look at the competition schedule? And that's always a multi-disciplinary conversation to weigh up, the importance of tournaments, look at when to play, when not to play, and that sort of thing. And that sort of, feeds into this comment here. And we've had examples of that last season where we had an athlete actually pull out of a final, but in hindsight it was a good decision, because it meant he could play in subsequent weeks and play really well. So yeah, sometimes difficult decisions to make, but that's a little bit how you have to look at it, I think. Other strategies in season, keep them strong. So like I said, all their reactive loads are probably coming from the court, and in the gym you're going slow, not a lot of reactive work, and just maintaining that strength of the musculotendinous complex. The other thing we can do is throw some drugs at them and get their pain under control a little bit, so a little bit of just pain relief when the medical staff believe that's appropriate. And another good find that we've had for a trick up our sleeve for the in-season management is using a lot of isometric work. So there's a bunch of work came out in 2015 from Australia, from Rio, who did a PhD, and it was looking at some of the pain perceptions at the brain level, and yeah, I don't understand a lot of it fully. On a practical level, what came out for me was, if you do some heavy isometrics at the start of your session or the start of the warm-up, it can alter your perception of pain and decrease your pain and allow you to train. So practically what this means, if you're in a tournament, you can do this reverse squat that we saw before, which is this one. Bang that around the net post, 4 sets of 45-second holds, and that's serving in the warm-up, and that's serving to decrease the pain to allow you to play a bit more. We've also used it with leg extension holds, isometrics in the warm-up. So that has, I think, given us something. We've found that to be quite effective in helping. It's not solving the problem, but it's helping to just reduce that pain to allow the guys to get through some matches. Yeah, so there's some of our in-season management principles. From a prevention perspective, I guess start with this comment. A major goal of the Youth to Run Your Talent Team pathway is to set the athletes up to handle 15 to 20 hours of jump trainings and potentially 1,000 jumps in a week. So first step is, we know these young kids have got to become robust enough to do a heap of jumps in training and up to 1,000 jumps in a week in a tournament. So how do we go about systematically building the ability to be able to do that? A lot of it's just good normal training processes. It's not specific to the knee. We do this with athletes regardless of that. But screening, identifying the at-risk individuals. So looking at their strength levels, looking at their jump scores, looking at their landing control ability, looking at their flexibility stuff, identifying who's potential for knee pain, and then putting these, addressing, the controllable things in here that we can. We monitor loads via SmarterBase. So we're using the session RPE system. So session time times the rating of perceived exertion, how hard out of 10, give us our training units. And I think we're making steps forward in keeping an eye on how much training is happening. The additional metric that we're using is the number of jumps. So we're collecting number of jumps in ball trainings, in strength trainings, in indoor volleyball trainings, in the whole any jumps that are happening. We're trying to collect to give us that overall view of how many jumps are happening in a day, in a week, in a month. We're now screening for pain with this single leg decline squat test. So I'm using that in the gym with all athletes just to detect, catch any changes in the pain scores early. Okay, so that's really controlled because we can do it in a standardized way. They do their standardized warm up in the gym, and they do their mobility work, their activation stuff. They come stand on the board and they give us a score, and the athletes get really used to it and good at it, and it takes no time out of the session. So we're screening with that. Within the SmarterBase system, we're starting to build in some alerts. So if this single leg decline squat score is above 3, it's flagging up red, and a little email alert's going out to the relevant staff members. We haven't had a lot over 3 so far this year, so it's been good. We also have a from looking at some of our data from the previous year, looking at this, what percentage of weekly increase caused these flare-ups. And with one particular athlete, with Rob, we found these 40% increases were the number. So we put that in place to flag. So now the coaches are probably all sick of these alerts coming through to their emails. So the next step for us with that is to individualise that threshold. So that threshold might be relevant for Rob, but we need to find what threshold is relevant for all the other athletes. So we're currently looking at some different analysis with the number of jumps. So that was looking at a 40% week-to-week increase. Now we're actually thinking of looking at an acute versus chronic load rolling average scenario and see if the acute spikes a certain percent over the chronic. So we want to go back and check our data, sort of reverse engineer it and see if that's a more valid alert system. So there's some of the things we're doing with load and how we monitor load. We're addressing the mobility just from a programming perspective with the youth and talent, addressing a lot of the mobility issues early as a priority in the early phase of their programs. We've been able to set some benchmarks of knee to wall tests. Of course, this is variable depending on lengths of tibia and who has a long shin and a short shin, but we've been able to set a global 15 and just say, look, we know knee to wall is important for dissipating the force as well, so let's work on it if we can. Likewise with calf endurance, we've added that aspect to the programming a bit more. Just so, if calves, that ankle calf complex is functioning well, it can help dissipate some of the forces. So we screen for that now and train it. Strategy to prevent patella tendinopathy: get strong. Squats, single leg work, the Olympic lifts, some heavy eccentrics, just good sound basic programming with the juniors and teaching them to move well and then getting them nice and strong. Looking at landing control, so we've started to look at a particular test to screen for it. Probably need to continue to investigate that a bit further. Looking at planning our loads a bit better. So the periodization aspect of just having variation day to day and week to week. So light, medium, and heavy days, and also light, medium, and heavy weeks. So I think that's been a good step forward for us. What else have we had? The other aspect in terms of prevention is this PPP, so that's our Patella Preparation Plan. As Vic knows, it's important to have a good acronym. Helps make the program look that little bit sexier. The Patella Preparation Plan is basically if the athletes in the talent team are transitioning to indoor volleyball. So they've finished playing beach over summer and indoor season is starting up in 6 weeks or something. Then we know that by week 6 we want to achieve X number of hard surface jumps, and then in the weeks preceding that we would just build into our strength program a nice progressive overload, increasing number of hard surface jumps per week, just to phase that transition in, so it's not a sudden transition from 0 jumps on a hard surface to 100 jumps on a hard surface. You're building that number up. Likewise with the top teams, when we know that they're going to a venue that's notorious for having harder sand, then we can prepare them for that. So going to Tenerife where the sand is firmer, in the weeks before that we'll start to build in some really low amplitude plyometrics on the hard surface. By that I mean it might be a couple of minutes of skipping or a little bit of a little ankle jumps or something really basic like that, just to prepare the system a little bit for that firmer surface. So we just get, and we've I think had good effect with that when we planned it in the last season. So there's some of our prevention strategies. This is going into a bit more detail on the landing control assessment. So can we influence landing control? The sport's uncontrolled. Is it a capacity or is it a pattern? So yeah, so it's interesting speaking to, I think we can tidy up the basic mechanics a bit. But yeah, changing how someone lands in their sport-specific skill is going to be tough. Like I've heard the analogy of it's like trying to change a golf swing. It takes a lot of work, and if someone has that bad pattern, how much new work do you have to invest to overcome it? So are you better off forgetting about changing the pattern and just working on being strong as an ox to be able to handle your crappy mechanics or non-optimal mechanics. So that's a discussion, the debate that goes around. Yeah, this is our assessment that we've used. We've got filming from the front and the side. There's Julia dancing around a little bit. So this is a task that I've taken from the literature. It's more related to ACL prevention. So it's looking at the valgus stress of the knees. Are the knees going in together? What are their angles like? I know Ina is using this in Papendal, and I need to go and have a chat to her about it and get her thoughts on how to score it and how to assess it a bit better. And I know in the indoor program they have a more sport-specific landing assessment. They look at a block jump and how the mechanics are on that sort of landing. So that could be something that's more relevant for us. But what I've found with this test for us, it helps identify the real shockers, but then I don't think it distinguishes further beyond that what's really at risk and what's really not. So I think this is a good start for when entry to the talent program and that sort of thing, but maybe we need something a bit more detailed down the track. This was a surfing program I went to. They were doing a jump. So they have a lot of landings in surfing as they come off aerials in the waves and have to land. They looked at the ground reaction forces, so they're trying to land softly with low ground reaction forces, and then looking also the time to stabilization, and that was their thing they looked at. So maybe that's something that could be thought about and adapted and used with us. This was just an example of our periodization and how we're, I think, doing a better job of planning our loads and planning our jump loads. So varying, the two things, varying the load week to week and also day to day. So this is the daily jumps through a preparation phase of two athletes, and you could see there were big days and little days, little days and big days within the week. So 4 jumping sessions within the week, bigs and littles in terms of preparing for the tournament. Also with the week to week periodization, medium, heavy, very heavy, some deload weeks. So really undulating load really nicely. But then with the jump loads, you can see nice progressive overload in terms of the weekly target. Sorry, that's the load. Here's the jumps here. Building the jump loads systematically through the period. And what might be interesting there is in a deload week, the total load might be deloaded, but the number of jumps might still be quite significant. So, and that's just working in the progressive overload pattern of the jumps. Okay. So, what are the learning points from all this? We've had better success with an eccentric concentric protocol than an eccentric only. So, to speak to that point, in terms of some of the rehab protocols, some of the research initially looked at this eccentric only protocol, so that was on a decline board. Doing slow eccentric. I think it was 2 legs up, 1 leg down, 3 sets of 15 and twice daily. And we weren't quite doing it to that frequency, but that I found is the literature is saying now it just hurts, and it wasn't having that good results. We've used this heavy slow resistance protocol, which is some slow eccentrics and concentrics, phasing through from high reps down to low reps, and we've had some good results of that. Silber-Nagel profile is basically just a good training stimulus, starting with some eccentric, concentric work, building in some speed, building in some balance, and then some pliers at the end. So that was more of a normal training progression. So we've used this aspect with really good effect, and yeah, so that was one of the learning points, is beating the guys up on the decline board with 3 sets of 15 twice a day wasn't helping out. Other learning point for me was to make it individual and don't be too tied to the protocol. So be principle driven rather than protocol driven. So the example I use for this is the heavy slow resistance program that I just said is really good. It has a really high volume at the beginning. So what I've actually built in is a bit of a build to this volume and then starting. So if we look at this is the actual program, 3 times a week, 3-0-3 tempos, so 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up in non-compressive positions. 4 sets of 15 at a 3-0-3 tempo is bloody a lot of time under tension, a lot of work. So what I actually do is 3 sets of 8, 3 sets of 10 in the weeks before, just to build to this, because it's a big whack of work and it's really hard. So yeah, so that's an example that don't be stuck with the protocol, stick to the principles more is my thing. Another learning point with the degenerative tendon guys, don't spend your ballistic work in the gym. So what that's basically saying is the guys that have a limited number of stretch shortened cycles, say, or a limited number of knee load, what we were doing is spending more of that jump load on the court and just the heavy slow strength work in the gym. We weren't doing ballistic lifts, we didn't do cleans, we didn't do jump squats, we didn't do any sort of plyometric stuff. We kept it really separated like that. And I guess to me that comes to this one as looking at the goals. And so in some scenarios it's like step 1 is get them able to handle the number of jumps and get on the court. If that's the goal, then you're probably going to take this approach. Versus if the goal is to put 10 centimeters on the jump, then maybe you have to be a bit more aggressive and you have to say, hey, no, we have to do some work in the gym and less time on the court. But so that's that was a learning point for me. Looking at the performance gains, so I'll skip to this slide here. The performance benefits. This was looking at a couple of our guys who went through this heavy slow resistance protocol. So in our rehab, we're doing a lot of slow eccentrics and we're doing a lot of isometric work with the patella tendon guys. And at some point, I had this realization that, Jesus, these guys were jumping great, maybe even better than some of the guys on more the traditional training. So, and it fits for me personally. Last year I read this book, Triphasic Training, by a couple of American fellas, and his concept was spending periods working on the eccentric phase, periods working on the isometric phase, and periods working on the concentric phase of each lift. And his idea was this is from the book Triphasic Training. The developed athlete can decelerate harder, faster, have a quicker turnaround point, so the isometric, you'll get a better concentric reaction. So this was, I think this actual exercise was doing some squats on a force plate, so they're looking at the rapid deceleration down and the rapid acceleration out. So yeah, for me, just putting all that stuff together in my head was, is this a nice way to train in general, or can it add something to the program? And it's something I've added in a bit more this year, is some attention on the eccentric phase, so squats with a slow down or squats with a hold at the bottom to work on the isometrics. in order to help get this stronger eccentrically, so you can get a steeper down and ultimately a steeper out. So yeah, so that was a nice little learning point for me. Other ones, the degenerative guys don't like compression, so those tendons that are grotty and degenerative, keeping them out of things like stretching, so is also causing some compression on the tendon. Also being careful with activities where you're kneeling in the gym and getting a lot of those compressive forces. Other learning point, this 40% rule, I spoke about that a little bit already. This is one athlete, so we have the weeks, what the tournament was or the training camp was, the number of jumps through here. So you can see a nice build up, 60 to 80 to 112, nice little progressive overload, and this was looking at the percentage increase each week. And here we had 2 periods where it went a little bit worse. So, and what we saw was this increase from 450 to 721 was a 60% increase, which was too good. And here again, 411 to 666, it was that 60%. So that's where I said, okay, let's put this limit in, this arbitrary limit in at 40 and see if that seems to be handled better. So perhaps maybe makes more sense on this graph where you see the nice progressive overload. Here we had this 60% increase that wasn't tolerated, and again here. So this is where symptoms got worse. Here we had some missing data. This was through World Champs where we didn't collect. But yeah, so that was one of the, again, we have to explore this a bit further, these relationships, but I think it does show a nice pattern of there is a threshold there at which they can handle, and yeah, so setting up some of those flagging systems into our system is what we're working on. One of the nice things to come out of it with these jump restrictions was improved intent in the skill practice. So this was really good feedback from the coaches. It was having a cap on the number of jumps. You've only got 30 jumps in practice today. It forced the player to be engaged in making every jump count, and every attack count, or every serve count, or whatever it is. And also, yeah, it forced some creativity from the coaching side in terms of their drill design and that sort of thing. So, and the feedback was really nice to hear from Gijs that, yeah, someone like Rob, his side out percentage or his kill percentage, you know, he thinks, yeah, you can't really prove it, of course, but you think there's some relationship there with focused practice translating to good stuff on the court, so making every touch count. Another good learning point for us was often when we're trying to build towards 1,000 jumps in a week, at some point the jumps stop becoming a restriction, and so you've only got 30 jumps, so they start becoming a target. You have to get 120 jumps today. So yeah, what we learnt from this was initially, yeah, players were getting through their jumps in the session. The coaches had done all they wanted to do. They played 2 sets. They'd done whatever, all their drills, and the guys still had 30 jumps left in the bank. So our first thing was like, okay, play another set, or or keep going, or keep doing the drill. Whereas, yeah, what we pretty quickly changed to was, okay, once the jump becomes a target, it's no longer a restriction. Train how you want to train, get what you want to get done from a coaching perspective, and then if you've got 30 jumps left over, let's use them in a more of a physical context and do them as repeated efforts with jumps, or we do some landing mechanics works on and off the boxes, and so we still got a focused practice with a goal for our jumps, rather than just adding volume with no real intent from a volleyball perspective. So that was a good learning point. And the final one here was putting a case manager in place for the rehab cases. So yeah, like I say, it's all about managing, monitoring and controlling the loads. And if one person is the point person, I think that process is much simpler, especially in our environment is really challenging with lots of part-time staff and time constraints on everyone. I think appointing one of the physios or coaches or S&C, it doesn't really matter. Whoever's the best person for the job in that case, it's worked well for us. So I think that's also a good learning point. So this was a discussion I also had with the boys at Papendal, was the squat depth discussion. So what we found, what's clear, is that the symptomatic tendons don't like the compressive forces and hence deeper squats. So I'll show you a picture here. You can imagine as this gets more, that the moment arm or the liner pulls different, causing more compressive stress on the tendon. So what we've tended to have done is squat to this sort of 90-degree mark and keep it at that, and that's the limit of some of the degenerative guys' squat depth. But what we often have discussion about is, okay, in general, squatting to parallel, I think, has some good benefits. You develop strength for a full range. It does happen in the sport. Maybe not in block, but they're into full knee flexion positions in defense and all these sorts of things. You have a good activation of the posterior chain with a good parallel squat. You get transfer to better positions on things like cleans, if that's something that we're looking to develop in order to develop vertical jumps, so on and so forth. And some studies have showed a better transfer to sports performance. So this study I found looked at half squats, quarter squats, parallel squats, and looking at what transferred to jump performance better, and actually the full squats were superior in this case. I think it challenges athletes to develop adequate range of motion, so it can be a good mobility training. And also with the younger guys, my pet peeve is if we just half squat them, it can inflate their egos perhaps artificially, and I want to keep them really focusing on that earn the right to progress process. So these are, in my eyes, some of the things, the reasons to promote a parallel squat, keeping in mind that this particular population with degenerative knees don't like these deeper positions, so it's finding some balance on that. So what I often hear is a counter argument, well, it's not angle specific to the sport, but then I think that opens up a whole nother discussion around should we be training general capacities or really specific, and I think there's times for both strategies. My other argument is if you don't ever train into a deeper position, how are you going to expect that to happen on the court, because the body doesn't have strength in that position. So perhaps by just training generally with full range as a general principle, then maybe you give the body more movement solutions that they can use in the court. But also looking at the period of the season, perhaps in the general prep, doing more of a full range, and then in the specific transfer phase, you might use a more half squat with a non-symptomatic athlete. So what I'm trying to sort of get my head around with this discussion, as it's circling around in my head a bit, is can we look at the different athletes differently? So I think with a degenerative tendon, I think it's clear that they're not going to enjoy these compressive positions, so we probably won't do it. But with a reactive tendon, so say a younger player who's only had these initial flare-ups, can we at some point, once they've gotten back to being asymptomatic for a certain period, look at squatting to a fuller depth for all these reasons at some point? And for me, that's looking at perhaps coordinating well with the volleyball coach in the total load approach, is if we are getting some higher knee loads in the gym, can we adapt the total load by reducing some of the stuff on the court in early phase of pre-season, for example. Yeah, so that's sort of my question that I'm struggling with at the moment. So I'd be interested to discuss that a bit further with you guys. Yeah, but also looking at some of the squat variations. Here we're doing squats to 90 degrees. This is a powerlifting style box squat where again you get that 90 degrees because you sit back a little bit more. You can really wide hips. It gives that parallel thigh sort of position, so it's a bit of an artificially manufactured. And here Alex doing a hip belt squat. He wasn't doing this for his knees, he's doing it more because he's got stiff dorsiflexion. But again, this is one we've added and found that you still get this 90 degree job done here, but sitting a bit, yeah, what the appearance looks a bit deeper, if that makes sense. And they've had good feedback on that, on how that feels on the knees. So maybe that's one for the future to include more and more. A future direction where we're going with this stuff. Occlusion training is one that I maybe want to investigate a little bit more for in-season management. So occlusion training is cutting off or restricting the blood supply or the venous return to the muscle, so you get more metabolic stress, and basically you can stimulate hypertrophy with lower loads. So if an athlete has knee pain in season and they can't lift as heavy as we want them to lift, in order to maintain muscle mass, is this occlusion something that we can look at? So we put it on the table at some point, but we still need to look into it a little bit more. I'll probably have to play with it myself a bit. Yeah, utilising some of these different squatting variations. The acute and chronic jump monitoring. So like I said, the 40% alerts are starting to kick off everywhere. I'd like to analyse some of our data in terms of an acute versus chronic jump stress, so that's something to come for the future. Playing more with our accelerometer loads, so we've made a big step forward in terms of counting the number of jumps and using the vert sensors to assist with that. But we know that it doesn't factor in sprints, it doesn't factor in change of direction, it doesn't factor in the different sorts of jumps. You know, not every jump's equal in terms of the stresses. So I think the next layer of information to add to that is some accelerometer stuff. So that's going to be exciting for us to add that part in into our monitoring system. Other part I put on here is tournament structure. So what we've seen from some of our jump numbers is these tournaments with multiple matches in a weekend setting are basically designed to kill someone's knees. So yeah, is that something that we can look at or put on the table to discuss from a management perspective? Is how the tournaments are structured domestically for our tunnel teams and youth teams. Probably beyond that is out of our scope, but that's something I think to discuss. And yeah, also with some discussions going around at the moment on junior athletes perhaps combining indoor and beach to a greater extent, and then specialising in one or the other a bit later on. I think some of the stuff we mentioned in this talk has some important implications on the physical training and the load management strategies. So I think that's important to consider some of these things in that decision-making process. So there you go. Sorry for waffling on for a long time. Hope that's of interest to someone. And yeah, give me a call if you want to chat about it anymore. Cheers. Thanks a lot.